Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out what was Great Britain like in the 80s.
In this video, we throw back to the 1980s in Great Britain, an era of
Alright.
bold fashion, iconic music and political change. What was life like in 1980s Britain? Keep watching to find out.
Alright.
Margaret Thatcher became the first female Prime Minister of the UK, and Thatcherism refers to the policies of this former British Prime Minister. This woman changed the UK by reducing the government's role and promoting the free market. Thatcher believed the government should focus more on currency and defense while leaving the other areas to individuals. Influenced by economist Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, she used monetarism to control inflation. Her harsh policies led to unemployment but still earned her a second tenure.
Strike.
Margaret Thatcher lowered taxes and increased indirect taxes like VAT.
It is your tax which pays for public spending. The government have no money of their own. There is only taxpayers' money.
She privatized state-owned companies like British Gas, British Airways and British Telecom. This harsh move shifted the economy from public to private ownership. Margaret Thatcher emphasized so much on traditional family.
Yeah. So British Airways used to be owned by the British government? British Airways was created in 1974 after a British Airways board was established by the British government to manage the two nationalized airline corporations, British Overseas Airways Corporation and British European Airways. After almost 13 years as a state company, BA was privatized in February 1987 as part of a wider privatization plan by the Conservative government. Wow. How do you do that? Did they sell it? Did they just sell it to the highest bidder? Who do you sell it to? How was it done? Was that all fair? It seems like a way to give money to rich people.
Margaret Thatcher emphasized so much on traditional family values and strong defense. She is remembered for her determined leadership style and controversial policies like banning homosexuality in schools.
Banning homosexuality in schools. What does that entail? How do you do that? As soon as you walk through the door of the school, you can't be gay anymore? How do you enforce that? Section 28 refers to a part of the Local Government Act 1988, which stated that local authorities in England, Scotland, and Wales shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish materials with the intention of promoting homosexuality, or promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. It caused many organizations such as LGBT student support groups to either close, limit their activities, or to self-censor. In addition, Section 28 has had a widespread impact on schools across the United Kingdom. This was due to uncertainty around what constituted the promotion of homosexuality. There's a gray area, leading many teachers to avoid discussing the topic in any educational context. Well, that can't be good. You're just going to not acknowledge that there are gay people? How do you, what? Homosexuality was decriminalized for men over the age of 21 under the Sexual Offenses Act. If you're 20, you can't be gay. If you're 21, okay, you can be gay. Oh, the whole HIV/AIDS thing probably affected it. Rising negative sentiments towards homosexuality peaked in 1987. Despite growing levels of homophobia in 1980s Britain, several labor-led councils across the country introduced a range of anti-discrimination policies and provided specialist support services for their LGBT constituents. Okay, so at the same time Thatcher was doing that, other organizations were going the other way.
Also remembered for her role in the miners' strike of the 1980s.
Right.
The strike lasted from 1984 to 1985 and was a key moment in British history. Thousands of miners and their unions fought against Prime Minister Thatcher's plan to close 20 coal mines. Nearly 140,000 of the 187,000 miners in the country joined the strike to save their jobs.
That's a
The
lot.
strike started at Cottonwood Colliery and spread to other parts of the UK. The strike lasted for months, believing the Prime Minister would agree to their demands. Unfortunately, it ended with the miners losing. For this reason, Thatcher is known as the Iron Lady to this day. When she heard about the looming strike, she stockpiled coal to keep power stations running. Eventually, many coal mines were closed after the strike. This led to widespread poverty and unemployment. The last deep coal mine closed in 2015, marking the end of the coal era. In April 1982, Argentina...
Wow. That put so many people into poverty. That's amazing.
In April 1982, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands with 600 soldiers and overpowered the 57 British Royal Marines. Even though this surprised the British government led by Margaret Thatcher, she fired back. On April 5, ships like HMS Invincible and HMS Hermes and thousands of soldiers set sail towards the islands.
Wow.
By May 1st, they arrived and work started.
That's kind of amazing. There were only 57 British soldiers. So that it started on April 2nd. On April 5th, the British government dispatched a naval task force. The conflict lasted 74 days and ended with an Argentine surrender on June 14th. Wow. The conflict had a strong effect in both countries and has been the subject of various books, articles, films, and songs. In the UK, the Conservative government, bolstered by the successful outcome, was re-elected with an increased majority the following year.
The Royal Air Force launched the Black Buck raids, the longest bombing mission at the time. They attacked the airport at Port Stanley and other flashpoints. But on May 4th, a missile hit HMS Sheffield and 20 crew members died. Just before then, the HMS Conqueror sank an Argentine ship, killing 323 soldiers with it. More British troops arrived days later to rescue the island. 3 huge British ships were lost in the Falklands War and many sailors died. The first land battle happened at Goose Green, where British soldiers fought and won against their oppressors. British soldiers mounted so much pressure on Argentine soldiers until they surrendered in June. Over 40 years after the Falklands War, British soldiers still celebrate their victory.
Wow, it's strange to think of the UK and Argentina fighting. I've heard of the Falklands War before. I didn't realize so many people died from it.
The new romantic movement transformed the UK music scene in the 1980s. Bands like Spandau Ballet, Duran Duran, and Human League championed this pop culture change. Duran Duran mixed pop tunes with stylish music videos to become British stars on MTV. Their appearance and danceable songs made them symbols of the era. As for Spandau Ballet, they introduced smooth, elegant sounds and sophisticated fashion. Hits like True had emotional lyrics and polished music.
Sorry.
Songs appealed to millions of fans globally. The Human League also used electronic instruments to create synth pop music. Their song Don't You Want Me blended technology and memorable melodies. Their unique sound defined the decade's music. These bands created something more than music. They introduced a cultural movement in the 1980s. They influenced other musicians, fashion, and pop culture. Fighting during football matches in Great...
That was the music? Hang on, do they cover music anymore? I don't think so. Wow, that was it. It's strange to think like British music in the 80s is being distilled down to this. Depeche Mode, Duran Duran, and Human League. It was so much more than that, y'all. What about Joy Division? It's kind of funny.
Fighting during football matches in Great Britain really started in the 1960s when the UK became notorious for football hooliganism. This phenomenon was called British or English disease. It spiraled in the 1980s until the UK government led a massive crackdown on football-related violence. On May 1st, 1982, after a London derby between Arsenal and West Ham United, a supporter was killed in a riot between fans of both teams. Pockets of football violence occurred months later. However, the most notable one occurred on May 29, 1985, when 39 Italian and Juventus fans were crushed to death during the European Cup final between Liverpool and Juventus at Heysel Stadium in Brussels. This event was later known as the Heysel Stadium disaster. Just before the game, Liverpool fans ran towards the other section of the field containing Italian fans. As the victims tried to escape the fighting, a wall collapsed on them. Because of this, English clubs were banned from all European competitions until 1990.
Yeah, I've heard of that disaster before. That is crazy. That is nuts. Steve Curry, chief football reporter, says it was a tragic experience, senseless, meaningless murder. I watched a young man die this weekend, stabbed to death in the street by a gang of rampaging teenage soccer hooligans. It was sickening, tragic experience in a London suburban street in broad daylight. you get a bunch of young men hyped up, and then the groupthink kicks in. They have that animosity from the groupthink, start making dumb choices. Oh, that sucks.
The 1980s in Great Britain was also a period of economic volatility. The deep recession started in 1981 and hit the manufacturing industry. As you know, this sector was the mainstay of the economy. The recession caused over 3 million people to lose their jobs. Unemployment was worse in Wales and Scotland. The figures did not drop until the late 1980s during the Yuppie years.
What was the lowest or the highest unemployment rate in Britain in the 80s? 11.9% in 1984. That's pretty high. What is it right now? 4. Hey, that's good. What is it in USA? 4.1. Hey, y'all. We're the same. 1/10 of a point. We're the same. Although that 1/10 of a point in America is a lot of people. How many people is that? Oh, only 346,000.
During the Yuppie years, only then did the stock market boom and workers earned more. The UK enjoyed economic expansion towards the end of the 1980s. Unfortunately, this boom was short-lived because inflation returned in 1991. Let's remember that this decade was a period of post-war consensus. The Conservative Party was influenced by free market economists like Milton Friedman. Supporters of the Thatcherite revolution say the 1980s enabled the UK to tackle problems like poor industrial relations, economic decline, and inflation. How did the UK go from social house building to the housing emergency today? In the 1980s, social housing played a vital role in meeting the housing needs of millions nationwide. This program dates back to the late 19th century when the government embarked on the first social housing project. This project stretched through to the first half of the 20th century, and later on, in 1980 alone, 94,140 new social homes were built. But in that same decade, Margaret Thatcher's government allowed tenants to buy social homes at discounted prices. In the same vein, she restricted the building and management of these houses. So by 1983, she had social house building halved to 44,240 a year. People were stuck in overcrowded and insecure houses. The new restrictions left thousands of people homeless. At the beginning of the 1980s, nearly 1 in 3 households lived in social homes. But today, social housing is no longer common. It is now more overstretched than an ambulance service in a war-torn area. The Yuppie culture was coined in the 1980s to describe young professionals who were wealthy and arrogant. Yuppies wore high-end fashion clothes, drove expensive cars, and boasted about their success. The 1980 Yuppies were educated and lived in large cities.
I think the Yuppie culture was big in the United States too. We had that here. We had Yuppies.
They mostly worked in tech, finance, academia, and the arts. Yuppie first appeared in print in the May 1980 issue of Chicago magazine titled From Yippie to Yuppie. Yuppies were materialistic and loud about it. Wannabe Yuppies wore luxury brands as proof of class. This culture gave luxury brands popularity. It introduced them to a new demographic of young adults who had lots of money to spend. Nearly 75% of Yuppies were childless couples because they had little or no time for sex. Sadly, the Yuppie heyday was short-lived, thanks to the stock market crash of October 1987. The market failure showed the Yuppies were not as smart as they claimed.
October 1987. I feel like we had a crash here sometime around that. Black Monday, October 19th, 1987. Yeah, that was worldwide. The whole Yuppie thing's similar here. Look at this Yuppie. Look at, she may not know about stocks as much as she pretends to know, but I love the way her hair moves. Look at that hair. The bounce, the spread. It's like a Michael Jackson video.
British fashion was influential and relevant long before the 1980s, but then fashion evolved from medieval England to Tudor times and the Victorian era. Remember that British royal fashion also played a role in modern trends. As you know, Kate Middleton and Meghan Markle are fashion icons today. The 1980s is popularly called the time that fashion forgot. It was an interesting time for Great Britain. Fashion rules were ignored and broken during this decade. Some of the most popular trends today were borrowed from the 1980s. I'm talking about power suits, shoulder pads, lycra sportswear, miniskirts, etc. Denim became popular in this decade.
Is that British?
Like women, menswear had lots of power dressing in the 80s.
See, all of this fashion stuff looks very American to me, except for these royals sitting on a gold couch.
Computers invaded British homes in the 1980s for obvious reasons. These gadgets were cheap and allowed millions of people to experience a computer.
Y'all, I had a Commodore 64. Remember that? Commodore 64.
Machines like the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, Acorn Electron, and Commodore made computers user-friendly. These computers demystified information technology and revolutionized schools, homes, and offices. Computers were previously reserved for scientists and big organizations. They were so rare that an individual did not dream of owning one. These machines were too bulky because they were built with bulky electronic components like transistors and valves. Owning a giant computer in your home felt like science fiction, but not anymore. As technology improved, manufacturers squeezed more power into smaller electronic units. Today, nearly every adult in the UK owns a smartphone. It's also normal to own a desktop at home.
Yo, this is the same as in the US. Same.
In 1982, Terry Higgins, a 37-year-old man, collapsed in a London nightclub where he worked as a DJ. He later died at St. Thomas's Hospital. Terry was one of the first people to die of an AIDS-related illness. Later that year, the same immune deficiency virus was found in heterosexual women. The syndrome was later known as Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, or AIDS. 1 year after Terry's death, the Terence Higgins Trust was established. This trust educated millions of Britons about the new disease. Meanwhile, the US had already recorded 3,000 cases and 1,000 deaths. AIDS ravaged the world in the 1980s. By the end of 1984, the UK recorded 80 cases and 46 deaths. The following year, the Department of Health released its first ever advice on AIDS. This announcement gave the disease an official recognition. Princess Diana opened her first specialist AIDS hospital in 1986 in England. Middlesex Hospital is the first institution in the world to focus on AIDS care.
Wow, y'all, good on Princess Diana. Because in the US, Ronald Reagan didn't even acknowledge it. When HAART first became available in 1995, the United Kingdom had around 30,000 people diagnosed with HIV. Germany had 38,000, the United States had 759,000, and more new infections every year than the United Kingdom or Germany had in total. I didn't mean to say, hey, we had more, that's just what came up. I mean, we have more people, of course we're going to have more cases, but the way the government responded, I think, was worse. So in 1986, Princess Diana was opening a hospital to specialize in care for AIDS victims, but Reagan in 1986 was just making promises that finding a cure was a priority. How's that going? You find it yet? Oh, darn. Not yet. Much higher sense of compassion and empathy for these sick people in the UK than the US, I'll say that.
British TV culture evolved so much in the 1980s. British TV entertained children and adults with comedies and sitcoms. These shows were full of funny characters, jokes, and stories that made people laugh. Top on the list was Only Fools and Horses. This sitcom tells the story of Del Boy and Rodney Trotter, who dreamt of becoming rich through their crazy schemes. Another favourite British TV show was Open All Hours, which featured Arkwright and his clumsy assistant Granville. These British sitcoms mirrored society and sometimes criticised it. The 1980s remains a unique decade for British television. Which British sitcom held your attention in the 80s?
Monty Python's Flying Circus? That's not a sitcom, but that's the British stuff I was watching in the 80s. Those are the only two TV shows they're going to mention. I mean, I guess it's a 12-minute video. You gotta distill it down a little bit. What were the most successful sitcoms? Let's just say successful TV shows. Dukes of Hazzard. Y'all had Dukes of Hazzard? Really? Buck Rogers, we had that. Heart to Heart, we had that, I think. Knots Landing, Benson, those seem like American TV shows to me. Best British films and TV shows of the 1980s. Educating Rita. Brideshead Revisited. Shirley Valentine. Time Bandits. Yeah. Chariots of Fire. The Complete Beatles. What? A Fish Called Wanda. Maurice. Oh yeah. Janet Baker. Full Circle. Mona Lisa. The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. With Nail and I. Yes. Yes. Brazil. Okay. A lot of these issues we share with the UK. The economy, yuppies, definitely we had yuppies. Fashion was very similar. The computer thing, technology, AIDS, similar. In the 80s, I was really young and I didn't really pay much attention to the news, but I did see Margaret Thatcher on the spitting image a lot. Yes. Yeah, that looks right. She was on there a lot. Oh, that's a good one. Look at that. Anyway, yeah, y'all. We went through the same pretty much. Be sure to go to Vintage Europe and like and subscribe. And if you made it this far in the video, give me a like and subscribe. Yeah. I'd like to thank my patrons. I'd like to thank my Buy Me a Coffee folks. Thank y'all for watching this with me. And I'll see y'all next time. Later.